Welcome to Travel Through Grief. I'm your host, Ellen Beckemeyer. I am so glad you are here. Every day on the calendar seems to invite us to celebrate something. Some days are lighthearted, some honor history, and some encourage us to smile, laugh, or gather around a table. But every once in a while, a day comes along that asks something more of us. It asks us to travel through grief, to observe, but to act. July 21st is National Be Someone Day. At first glance, it sounds almost poetic. It sounds like one of those phrases that belongs on a greeting card or an inspirational poster. Be someone. But the true purpose of this day, it's much more powerful than that. National Be Someone Day was established to encourage every adult to recognize the signs of child abuse and neglect, to take those concerns seriously, and to report them when necessary. Its message is built around a simple but unforgettable idea. 10 seconds of courage can change the course of a child's life. 10 seconds, that's all. 10 seconds to notice something doesn't seem right. Just 10 seconds to ask one more question. And 10 seconds to make a phone call and to believe a child. It takes 10 seconds to become someone who makes a difference. I read about the history of this observance. I found myself thinking about grief. At first, the connection didn't seem obvious. Now, Travel Through Grief, we explore a lot, and we usually explore the losses that come later in life. The death of someone that we love, the ending of a relationship, the closing of a chapter, or the unexpected turns that force us to rebuild. But then I realized something important. Now, I've always known, but not all grief begins with a funeral. Sometimes grief can begin in childhood. Sometimes it begins the first time a child realizes that home is not safe. Sometimes it begins when the people who were supposed to protect them become the source of their fear. Sometimes it begins because no one noticed, or perhaps someone did notice, but they remained silent. The grief that follows childhood trauma is different from the grief we usually talk about, but it is grief nonetheless. It is the grief of innocence lost too early, the grief of trust that was broken, and the grief of wondering whether anyone cared enough to step in. Many adults carry those invisible wounds for decades. They become remarkably successful. They build their careers, raise families, volunteer in their communities, and smile in photographs. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, there is a still younger version of themselves quietly asking a question they never had the words to speak. Why didn't someone help me? That question is echoed through countless lives. The beautiful thing about National Be Someone Day is that it reminds us we have the opportunity to answer that question for someone else. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to work in education. You don't even have to be a counselor or a social worker. You simply have to be an adult who is willing to pay attention. Children spend much of their lives surrounded by adults. The teachers, the coaches, the bus drivers, the school librarians, Sunday school volunteers, neighbors, grandparents, relatives, friends of the family, even the store clerks who see the same families every week. Each one of those adults has the potential to become someone a child remembers forever. Most of us can think back to our own childhood and remember an adult who made us feel seen. Maybe it was a teacher who believed in you before you believed in yourself. Maybe it was the coach who encouraged you after everyone else had given up. Maybe it was a neighbor who always smiled when you rode your bike past their house. And maybe it was a grandparent who listened without judgment. Those moments may have seemed ordinary to the adult, but to the child, they became part of the foundation upon which confidence was built. The opposite is true as well. When children are ignored, dismissed, or left to navigate fear alone, those experiences become part of the foundation too. As adults, we often underestimate the influence we simply have by being present. We assume changing a life requires something extraordinary. We imagine grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Yet most meaningful change begins much more quietly than that. It begins by noticing, listening, trusting our instincts when something doesn't feel right. One of the reasons child abuse can continue for so long is because it often hides in plain sight. Children may not have the vocabulary to describe what is happening. They may be too frightened to speak. They may worry no one will believe them. They may have been threatened into silence. Some become withdrawn. Others become unusually aggressive. And some struggle in school. Others become perfectionists because they believe making no mistakes, it is the only way to stay safe. There isn't one single pattern that tells the whole story. That's why awareness matters. It isn't our job to investigate or determine guilt. That responsibility belongs to trained professionals. Our responsibility is much simpler. If we have genuine concern that a child may be in danger, we can choose not to ignore it. That decision may feel uncomfortable, awkward, even feel frightening. But imagine how much more frightening it is to be the child waiting for someone to notice. National Be Someone Day reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is just a quiet phone call. It is asking for help. It is refusing to look away because pretending not to see it is easier. There is another lesson hidden inside this observance. This speaks to every one of us, whether or not we ever find ourselves in that situation. Children are always watching. They are learning what kindness looks like. They are learning how adults solve problems, how people speak to one another. They are learning whether the world is a place where people help or where people walk away. Every conversation they hear, every act of generosity they witness, every apology they see sincerely offered, and every moment of compassion, that becomes part of the blueprint they carry into adulthood. Being someone isn't only about intervening during a crisis. It is also about modeling the kind of humanity we hope the next generation will inherit. Perhaps that is one reason this observance resonates so deeply with me. Travel through grief has never simply been about surviving loss. It has always been about what we choose to carry forward. When grief enters our lives, it changes us. The question is whether it leaves us more guarded or more compassionate. Many people become incredibly sensitive to the pain of others because they know what suffering feels like. They recognize loneliness because they have lived through it. They notice that quiet person standing alone because they remember being that person themselves. Pain is a strange way of sharpening our vision. If we allow it, grief teaches us to pay closer attention. It teaches us not to assume someone is fine simply because they're smiling. It teaches us that healing often begins with feeling safe. And safety almost always begins with another human being, one person, conversation, moment of genuine care. As I think about the people who helped me through my own seasons of loss, I realize very few of them had perfect words. None of them had the ability to erase what had happened. They couldn't change my past. They couldn't even remove my grief. But they did something equally important. They stayed. They answered the phone. They sat beside me and they listened. They reminded me I am not walking through the darkness alone. That is what being someone looks like. It isn't perfection. It is presence. I wonder how different our communities might become if every adult adopted that mindset. What if every child knew there were safe adults nearby? What if every elderly neighbor knew someone would check on them? And what if every grieving person knew someone would sit with them instead of trying to fix them? What if every teenager believed there was at least one adult who would listen without judgment? The world wouldn't suddenly become free of pain, but fewer people would have to carry it alone. That may be one of the greatest gifts we can offer another human being, our presence. Not because we have all the answers, but because we are willing to remain. National Be Someone Day, it also reminds us that courage is contagious. When one person speaks up, others often find the courage to do the same. When one teacher advocates for a child, I have watched it. Other educators pay closer attention. When one neighbor reaches out, another neighbor follows. And when one family chooses compassion over indifference, an entire community becomes stronger. Kindness spreads. Compassion spreads. Hope spreads. The ripples travel farther than we can imagine. But the same is true of silence. Silence allows fears to grow. Silence convinces people they are alone. And silence whispers that nothing will ever change. Today asks us to choose differently, to become people who notice, people who care, people who are willing to act when action is needed, people who understand that love is not merely a feeling, but something expressed through our choices. And before I close today, I'd like to simply leave you with a simple invitation. I want you to think back to your own childhood. Who was someone there for you? Who made you feel safe? Was there someone there who encouraged you, believed in you, saw potential in you before you could see it yourself? I want you to take this moment to be grateful for them. Now I need you to ask yourself another question. For whom could I have become that person? Maybe it's your own child or a grandchild or a niece or nephew or a student or the kid that lives next door. Maybe it's a young person at church or at work or in your neighborhood who simply needs one trustworthy adult in their corner. You don't have to change the entire world. You only have to change one moment for one person. Sometimes that is enough to change a lifetime. National Be Someone Day teaches us that 10 seconds can be someone's forever memory. It's 10 seconds to notice, 10 seconds to believe, 10 seconds to protect, and 10 seconds to remind a child that they matter. Those 10 seconds, they may never make the evening news. No one may even applaud. And you may never know the outcome. But somewhere, years from now, an adult may tell their own story and say, there was one person who noticed. There was one person who cared. And there was one person who made me believe my life was worth protecting. What an incredible legacy that would be. I want to thank you for joining me today on Travel Through Grief. If this episode encouraged you, I hope you'll share it with someone. Awareness really does grow one conversation at a time, and compassion grows one person at a time. So until next time, remember this: there is always a way through. Sometimes a path. It begins with healing our own wounds, and sometimes it begins by helping someone else feel safe enough to begin healing theirs. And sometimes the most extraordinary thing we will ever do, it simply becomes someone when someone else needs us most. If this episode connected with you, I'd love for you to follow our podcast, leave a review, or share it with someone who may need it. Those small actions truly help new podcasts like Travel Through Grief grow and reach more people. And thank you to everyone who has already listened, rated, reviewed, and supported this journey. I appreciate you more than you know. Until next time, keep finding your way forward.